Okay, finally connecting up. We had a little bit of a glitch getting started on here. Let's get our little clickety-clack opening logo. Welcome to Evolution Hour. This is episode 200, a milestone of sorts. Twice 100, one half of 400. Amazing. Anyway, Troubles in Paradise, methodology of creationism website, a bunch of stuff there. You can download everything in there, free BPZs. That's all part of the background material. Jackson, unfortunately, my co-author on The Rocks Were There, Volume 1, and soon to be within the next year. Volume 2 is busy at the work thing, so will not be able to join us this evening. We will be having a variety of discussion, however, on the two topics. One is the ongoing analysis of Nathaniel Jensen's thing. Hello, Lisa for Truth. Slade, hi. I've seen the live chat. Yay, yay. I will put my little 2 cents in there and say hi all. Boop, boop, boop. We got Jensen going on his genetics thing and human evolution again, which I'll have some additional linkages up in relation to why Jensen crashes and burns at this particular point. This is the point where the rubber hits the road and there's the tires are squealing and all that sort of stuff. The other part of the episode relates to Matt Powell, bless his sweet little heart, the young earth creationist and incredibly pompous young man who dresses very well, especially in Russian tracksuits. But at any rate, he had an absolutely nonsensically stupid video recently about farting dinosaurs, which I discovered from Brainbug, who brought it to my attention, and other people have dived into it as well. And so I put this on a future analysis because it was just so astonishingly dumb, and there's a bunch of side issues to it as well. So let me also call attention to our obligatory thing, just in case we get a mess up on the communications. Let's get our patrons up here so I may share everybody and thank everybody who has helped the project. We've got our colleagues, Hendro, Colton, Eric, Cyrus, Zeshi, researchers, Travis, Ian, Convert Me, Stephen Early, Eat Meal, James, Fitzwater, History Minor, Ralph McFadden, Pelagia, Benjamin Simpson, Speed of Sound, Studio, DM Wing, Command Cyborg, Doronku Jelly, the Lavender Lady, who just had a birthday. Happy birthday, even though life is tough with all of the things going on with the health and that. Nonetheless, hang in there. And Todes Real, Christopher Johnson, Steve Bauman, Marigale Beddoes, Daniel, Insects are cool, aren't they? Morton Nielsen, Paul the Skeptic, Puffaluffagus, Bo Rasmussen, Devin Reeves, Alex Stone, Paul Williams, and our legacy patrons, Jen, Jody, Mike, John, Keith, Andrew Dyer, Yui, Mona, Brad, Daniel, Nyanya, Stagel, Sun, Sky, Stone, Ugly German Truths, Everett, Vincent, and Sur Weisbaum. All of you in one way or another have made it possible to plug along 1 week, one after another, 1 month after another, including through the panic times of the last couple of years. And so this is, thank you so much, and keep at it. I'm a Social Security guy who has a little bit of revenue from book sales, buy books, and also the Patreon. And that's my resources. Let me shut down that little puppy on here. Matt Paul can't read. How else can he get his uninformed bad takes? Yeah, Matt, for those of you who are not aware of Matt Powell, count yourself lucky. But at any rate, what I'll be putting into the linkages on that will be the link directly to his video and then a bunch of background material. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But first off, the exciting world of Nathaniel Jensen. He's finally getting down to his killer zone, human chimpanzee mitochondrial DNA, and particularly this little chart here, which is a claim as to how many mutations are occurring in human beings over 4.5 to 17 million years, 21,457, when in fact the actual number is only 1,400 and 83, which he does by an amazingly interesting chart mode here. Anyway, he had alluded to several technical papers that aren't all available online on this issue, that were just laying his foundation as to how you conducted germline mutations and all that, and measured them. But one was a 2014 paper by Venn et al. That Jeffrey Tompkins had previously riffed off of in one of his posts. And so I'm going to put the ICR posting chimp DNA mutation study selective to let you see Jeffrey Tompkins' spin on it. And one paper, though, that Jensen did allude to that was available public access is one by Langergraber from 2012 from PNAS, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. That's all open access, kids. So I'll be putting the link up to that. Now, all of this simply relates to mutation rates and how you can use them in the varying lineages to try to ascertain when the split was taking place between the various lineages. Now, as the more data accumulated over time and better techniques were developed, the picture improves, la-di-da. But all of them involve dates that are like millions of years ago, and that's not allowed in young Earth creationism. So Jensen has to come in and scrunch the system down. Difficulty with that is that he relies on only one source to do it, himself. He cites a 2015 paper, which we've alluded to, I believe, in earlier episodes because he's cited it before, that I'll be putting the Answers in Genesis link up to that little puppy. But anyway, in the little footnote, Jensen insists that he has developed, quote, more precise estimates of mutation rates. No. And this where I can bring in some additional thing. Little question there. All biblical literalists that are flat earthers are also young Earth creationists. I'm wondering how many verses it would take for Matt Powell, Ham, Hovin, Nephi, SFD, Ramat, Dr. Giggles, et al. To go that route. Yeah, that's an actually interesting. That's an interesting bit because there's very few things more hilarious than to see a young Earth creationist, doctrinal young Earth creationist, go after not just flat earthers. The same phenomenon occurs with geocentrists. There are way more geocentric creationists than there are flat earthers. You might not realize this from watching YouTube, but still, actually, and they've had a bigger impact. Gerardus Boo is still knocking around. I've alluded to it in my various work and books over the years because, you know, geocentrism is pretty dumb, and flat Earth is even dumber. You can see Kent Hovind and various others have put up posts. Jason Lyle, I think, has dumped on them and that, offering all the reasons why the Earth is not the center of the universe and or that it's not flat. And suddenly they go all naturalistic. You know, they can't really go too tight on the biblical cosmology because it is not only is it more or less recent, but it's also geocentric flat Earth. And we know as a historical process that the biblical cosmology, the interpretation of it in religious circles, mutated over time. So by the time Christianity comes along, geocentrism is the standard science model in Greek and Roman cosmology, but flat Earth is out. It's a globe Earth by then. So ixnay on the at Earth flag, okay? So you find that there were biblical flat earthers, Cosmos Indeplustes, I think one of them, was still pushing this down in the 3rd or 4th century, somewhere around in there. But by now, it was considered like, cut it, because they had adopted Aristotelian Greek science. They were the Euroses of the 4th century in that context. And they stuck with the geocentrism, though, because that was still part of the standard cosmology. Ptolemaic cosmology was geocentric and all that. And they stuck with that all the way down to that telescope era when it became increasingly untenable. And they had to move now to heliocentrism, which had some Greek antecedents, but there was no tradition in the biblical cosmology for a moving Earth. They could get by with a globe Earth, you know, Isaiah, the circle of the Earth. They could rationalize that part. But of course, a circle of the Earth could be shaped like a pancake or a pizza plate just as easily, Frisbee-shaped Earth. I am still pushing for the taco-shaped Earth. I really want that to be the case. Anyway, that what you see is an incredible double standard on apologetics here. That it's this is a little side digression, but all you need to do is to Google geocentrism, creationism, a flat Earth creationism, to see creationists responding to these things and how they go about doing it, and how suddenly they're looking at empirical evidence and letting empirical evidence decide the matter, because it's exceedingly difficult to have a mind so blinkered that you can be a geocentric creationist in the 21st century, and it takes an even more blinkered mind to be a flat Earth geocentric one. And once in a while you can, they're really rare, but for all practical purposes, flat earthers are young Earth creationist geocentrists. And you might find a non-believer flat earther out there, but you don't really, it's hard to tell what's going on in their head other than the fact that they're riffing off of videos. We have to remember that in terms of impact, though, flat Earth is irrelevant. Yeah, a celebrity now and then may flirt with it, but it has no effect on anything whatsoever. Whereas geocentrics have actually affected stuff, not because they're putting their geocentrism on the field, but because they're participating in the anti-evolution crusade. So Ellwanger, who was the Roman Catholic geocentrist back in the 1980s, he was the one that actually wrote the equal time legislation that was put up in various states, Arkansas and Tennessee and all of that. So he was a major player in getting the rhetoric of creationism on the field for court cases. And they lost miserably, but nevertheless, it was a big valiant try. A little ways later, 1999, the guy, Tom Willis, who actually wrote the Kansas anti-evolution standards that almost got in, is also really skeptical about this Earth revolving around the sun thing. And he was writing their science standards. So there's no counterpart that I know of anybody in that frame, the flat Earth frame, who's been anything like influenced like that. Little matter here of, if matter wasn't created and held in place by electromagnetic forces in a design pattern and set in motion that follows transcendental laws, then how did all this happen? Is there an option that why does the universe have mathematical structure at all? Why do physical forces end up the way they are? Now, cosmologists, when push comes to shove, say, we don't know. Why does E equal to the e to the pi power plus 1 equals 0 in mathematics? We don't know. It just does. Why does E equal mc squared as opposed to E equal mc cubed or E equal nc 1/4? Why about any of that? There we go. We don't know. And so you can, if you want to slap magic spurgle gods on them and say, they have decreed it to be so, fine, it makes you feel better, but it doesn't explain anything. And so the great mystery that the cosmologists of all stripes, whether they're religious or not, have to deal with is, why is the universe structured that way? Why do things behave mathematical laws? Why does gravity have a structure the way it does? Why does force equals mass times acceleration? Newton's one of Newton's laws of motion. Why is that? We don't know. It just does. And the same thing goes in quantum physics. Why do particles do what they do? Well, we could describe what they do, and it makes exquisite little mathematical structures, and there's probability theory and all this stuff. And why is that? We don't know. It just is. So that's basically the thing there. Old Scratch says, whatever forces interact, patterns arise. Yeah, things interact at various levels. And so you've got electromagnetism, you have, which is electromagnetism and the weak nuclear force. You can get up to, when you get up into really high energy levels, those two forces merge. And indeed, in the original Big Bang, all the forces would have been one single force. There would have been no matter at this stage. It's just at the earliest stages of things. Before that, all of cosmology goes tilt, and don't even try to bother about it, because it's entirely speculative at that point. That now, 29th century science that can build super duper particle accelerators, and we have explorations and exploring more in the universe and so forth and so on, may be able to fill in things in ways that will resolve some of these questions and push some of the question mark zones back into certainty and figure some of that out. We don't know. But there'll always be a certain uncertainty point. There'll always be a point where you go, we don't know. And that if the temptation is for the religious believer to come in and slap their God like a Post-it note onto whatever thing's in there, well, if that makes them feel better, which it usually does, then fine and dandy. But it doesn't explain anything. You could just call it the magic spurgle does it, or the spurgles do it, and it would make no more sense. It would explain no more things. My suspicion is, and this is where I get all Platonic, as in Plato, not to be confused with Play-Doh, which is an entirely different stuff that you use to extrude in. Anyway, that the universe is what mathematics does for a living, that everything in the universe is mathematical, and all of mathematics has some relationship in the universe. And the two are just the same thing, just looked at from different angles. I can't prove that. I don't hinge myself on it. I don't get up in the morning going, oh, mathematics is important. No. But my suspicion is that's why these things are structured the way they are, and why you end up living systems have Fibonacci series and the golden section and all these other little things that pop up in the structure of stuff that seem to have mathematical structure. Anyway, pretty sure. Anyway, Lisa says, pretty sure evolution went the wrong way with Hovind and Powell. Yes, well, that's not evolution's fault. That's bullheaded ignorance fault. That's a different thing. And to the extent that you could attribute their brains to evolution, it's just that the survival value of Homo sapiens has not depended on being able to correctly read accurately or think logically in any way. It only means that you can pass your genes on. And remember, little Kent Hovind had little baby Eric Hovind. So clearly he has successfully passed his genes on, independent of what's going knocking around in their little neurons in their meat computer. Matt Powell's a different kettle of fish. Anyway, I wanted to get on to the fact that Jensen and his stupid genetics. Back to topic. Evograd back in 2018 lit into Jensen's book from a genetics point of view. And he had a quite extensive analysis, and I'm putting the post up particularly about the one that relates to this little topic today. And Erica had drawn on that, Gutsick Gibbon, who did a very wonderful YouTube on this last year that I will be putting a link up on it. And they go into all the little fiddly bit details on here. The upshot is that Jensen, when he tries to do his better numbers, just makes up shit. And for example, he gets an initial mutation rate that is literally 10 times higher than anybody else can locate. He just making order up by a whole order of magnitude. And it gets worse after that. So it's just a pile up of stuff. We got Old Scratch says, at least evolution perfectly explains Hovind and Powell. They are victims of evolutionary tendencies. Well, that's actually brings up my idea about that Tortukan model, which is why the website says tortukan.wordpress.com. Tortukan, that little word Latin for turtle. It's my suspicion that there is a suite of cognitive systems that can connect up in brains that make it really easy to take an object of desire that they really want to be true and just only pay attention to the parts that fit that. And it makes them feel really good. So it forms a Tortukan rut in their head, and it can be big or small and deep or shallow, and there's could be multiple ones, and they could coalesce into larger ones. There'd be a lot of different variations theoretically. But the point is that it makes the mind impervious to evidence that conflicts with it. This would relate to cognitive dissonance issues and confirmation bias elements, can connect up to overconfidence, Dunning-Kruger effect, where people imagine that they're much more skilled than they actually are. All of that is a term that if I tell somebody that I think they're a Tortukan, I'm saying nothing at all about what their content of the belief is. They could be an atheist or a Christian. They could be a genius or an idiot. They could be politically liberal, politically conservative. But I would say that if you want to see examples of Tortukan minds at work, people with this mind shell imperviousness to contrary evidence thing, anti-evolutionism is a really easy place to see. And that's how I kind of got into that model, from looking at the behavior of creationists over a long time, because I, as an old fart, have been doing this research since somewhat casually since the 1980s, and way more seriously from the mid-1990s, and uber seriously to the point of writing books in the 21st century and kick butt material as I move from about 2009 on to the present. And that leads to all the different things, including the books and all that stuff. And what I was seeing was a curious pattern and structure to their behavior. And we have an advantage with creationism in that they've got a lot of it. It's much tougher to look at some of this stuff. At Lisa said, if they were born without a neocortex, that would explain a lot. Yes, well, indeed, it might. Or they might have they only have one little neuron in their head and it's doing as best as it can. That's one other way of looking at it. But anyway, you've got, unlike flat Earth that operates in very little niche groups, you have some 19th century flat earthers that pop up like little flotsam every once in a while. Alfred Wallace had a run-in with some of them in the 1850s and 60s and things. And then you've got a little smatterings on YouTube, or the moon landing hoax people. By definition, there were no moon landing hoax people until after we landed on the moon in 1969. So that's relatively recent. Anti-evolutionism has a long pedigree. There were people spewing stuff on from basically 1860 on down to the present. And so you can track whole lifespans of a person who becomes an anti-evolutionist, and you can see what happens over their entire life history. And there's oodles and oodles of examples of that. And you've got young Earth creationists and old Earth creationists and intelligent designers now, a bunch of different things. And so you can look at, and the little devils keep on writing stuff. So they put up postings online. The vast majority of creationism literature is available directly online to get. There are some niche journals that don't have all of their stuff available as either HTMLs or PDFs, but most of it's available somewhere or other. Some respects, a lot of this stuff became so accessible because of the divorce settlement between Answers in Genesis 1 and Answers in Genesis 2, when they had their schism in the early 2000s or somewhere in there, where they split the group up into Creation Ministries International and Answers in Genesis. Just in case you were wondering how those were related to one another, that used to all be Answers in Genesis. And so there were a whole bunch of ones, particularly the old guard over in Australia, that were thinking Ken Ham was getting a little too highfalutin and also greedy. And they had big lawsuits going back and forth. So they split the thing in group two, and they divided up the journals. So that's why you'll find versions of things of the Creation magazine and the various ones that they've done over the years. Creation ex Nihilo, which became the Journal of Creation. They're operating under varying titles. From a scholar's point of view, it took me years to figure out, oh, that one. ICR is exactly the thing. They got their impacts, their acts and facts, their days of praise. They got a whole bunch of little subgroups that often get meshed in together and all up at the same website. So it's figuring out what something is for citation purposes was a mess. And I'm only now getting it clarified. For example, the difference between the acts and facts posts and the acts and facts impact posts, and the all that. It's a mess. Anyway. Lisa for Truth says, how can anyone take a known fraud seriously? But a scholar can take anything seriously. And even though creationism is a pile of dingo's kidneys, it can be approached with exactly the same technical skills that you would use in analyzing the history of Greek drama, or the development of trade policies in the Holy Roman Empire, or whatever you want. Anything can be approached from a scholarly point of view in the same way that any set of data fields can be analyzed cladistically in terms of nested hierarchies or not. And so there's a bunch of tools that you can do that are independent of all this. Pi says the patterns arrive by following the golden section, following laws of motion that can be predicted because of the design structure. Yeah, we don't know about that. It seems people expel the golden ratio, even though it is intrinsically woven into our environment. The question is, why is it woven into our environment? And that's the funky part. Why does anything behave mathematically? why couldn't you have a universe, for example, or can you have a universe in which saints fall slower than sinners? In our universe, gravity takes over and pushes a saint and a sinner out of the window. Defenestration, there's even a word for that. And religionists have done that with one another over the years. Anyway, you push the saint and the sinner out the window, and if they have comparable mass, they're going to fall at the same rate. And they will accelerate until they are displacing a volume of air equal to their mass, at which point they reach terminal velocity. And over relatively short distances, like off of office buildings, they reach the ground splat, where a rapid deceleration occurs way before they reach a terminal velocity. Now, that's why a parachute works. That's why boats float. It's all exactly the same principles. All of that. Yes, Prague is a great city for that word. The defenestration of Prague. Yes, there's, it's something, if you didn't know about that, the defenestration of Prague. This is one of those great moments in holy shit Christian behavior that there was a movement about whether or not you're supposed to be able to read the Bible in the native language or not. And you had a big tussle back and forth about what would later become the roots of Protestant Reformation. But at any rate, they were having a big run-in with the still controlling Catholic Church, and one group started throwing some of them out the window, which is defenestration. That's what the term refers to. So fenestre is, I believe, the Latin for window. Isn't that exciting? You see, you can learn all sorts of things. So that way, you could call it de-windowization when you throw somebody out a window, but no, let's use the proper term, defenestration. Shall we, children? There we go. Okay. Anyway, we've got, so I'll be putting in the post then for Evograd and Erica that will give an awful lot of the technical material and the discussion of all the little ups and downs of why Nathaniel Jensen's arguments about mutation rates in relation to human mitochondria and others are a pile of dingo's kidneys. And we can empirically note that as far as anybody can see, absolutely nobody in the standard genetics community pays the slightest attention to Jensen's arguments. Boop. Now, is it just because they refuse to accept the power of the data? No, it's because it's crap. And that's why they aren't paying any attention to it. I'm sure, you know, if Jensen wanders around, and the same is true for Jeffrey Tompkins and Sanford and all the rest, that they will kind of float around the periphery of the regular genetics community and the like. And there are a few little minor journals, I think the Journal of Theoretical Biology or Theoretical Mathematics or some such thing, you know, where some of these, they can still publish material in there. And then a lot of them have floated, Sanford and others have floated over into the intelligent design orbit, where there are intelligent design books that have come out in the last few years that have a slew of creationists writing the material, but they're not talking about young Earth. They're just talking about all the genetics and fielding all their little genetic arguments. And so it's in an in-house club where they can put all their little footnotes in and their little arguments and their little formulas, and it sounds ever so convincing and persuades all of them that it's fine, but nobody else is arguing all of this. Anyway, part 2, since we are at 7:30, is Matt Powell and the farting dinosaurs. I love this part. Poor little Matt. Let me take a little swig of iced tea here. And despite the fact that it's in a whiskey glass, it is in fact iced tea. I've been drinking out of that size of glass. If I have a really tall glass, I'm liable to knock it over. I have done that. And then you got spilled iced tea and you can't drink it. So that's the best. So I prefer something with a nice low center of gravity like this. Plus, it's a nice looking glass. Anyway, in March of this very year, Matt Powell did a very short, but still especially stupid video, which I will be putting the link on, which was complaining about a 2012 paper, which I'm also going to put the link on because it's open access, which suggested that sauropods' methane emissions might have contributed to Mesozoic warming. Now, that was a very different argument than what Matt was presenting, because he had seen a Fox News post that hyped this thing up to the ceiling and claimed that dinosaurs gassed themselves into extinction, British scientists say. Nope. The paper had not claimed that. It had not even claimed in any way, shape, or form that the dinosaur methane emission was a major factor in the extinction of the dinosaurs. It only tried to argue that maybe the relatively warm conditions that existed prior to the mass extinction event might have had a contributing factor, because large dinosaurs would be producing methane from their little guts and things, much the same way as cows and others do now. Now, I don't think Matt ever got to the point of reading the original technical paper. All he did was riff off of the Fox News post. And he was just going on how silly this was. And children are being taught in schools that dinosaurs farted themselves into extinction. No, you're now hallucinating something else, which is that somehow or other there are schools that are relying on this as part of their curriculum. No. So Matt has just become untethered, and like the old guy in Up with his balloons, is just floating away into a completely imaginary world of his own contrivance, all from just this stupid Fox News thing. Now, what became particularly funky about this after I found out about it, and I found out about it when Brainbug called attention to all the flap over this, and so I'll put a link up to his YouTube as well, pointing out how lame Matt was. But I was doing some follow-up on this because I was curious to see a little bit more of the context. And it turns out, one, there was a lot of critical reception to this in the scientific community about this. A paper from Van Loon came out in 2012 that basically questioned the assumptions that the paper was running on, that dinosaurs would have been producing much of the way in the methane at all. So the original hypothesis, even in regards to just the restriction of the climate warming issue. And then there was a one from, it got occasional mention now and then. There was a 2013 paper that alluded to it in passing, along with discussing whether cockroaches played a role in cleaning up dinosaur poop in the dinosaur era. And then there was one from 2018 that was alluded to it along the way in talking about methane as a climate effect inducer. And then there was one from 2020 that was talking about mammal methane production, and they were alluding to it along the way. So at most, you could argue that maybe dinosaurs might have produced some methane, which could have contributed somewhat to the climate warming in that particular period. But that's had nothing whatsoever to do with mass extinction. Poor little Matt didn't understand that. Anyway, P.Z. Myers happened to have weighed in on that very same Fox News thing that Matt Powell did. So you can compare the floating off into the stratosphere idiocy of Matt Powell with P.Z. Myers, who pointed out that the problem wasn't the paper, it was the Fox spin. That it was an example of a superficial news thing from Fox News, the Fox Trump Pravda nutball network, although now they're starting to look more conventional now that we have the even more nutball Newsmax and the even more nutball Owanon and all of that crowd that's running along there, plus podcasts from Steve Bannon and all that have moved the goalpost of stupid farther out into woo land. But anyway, it's also came up peripherally in a completely different area, because that methane climate change thing bristled Andrew Watts, the climate denialist, because he didn't like the idea that there would be like a possible source for methane emissions and global warming from organisms in the past. So he was dumping on it for that reason. And that shows you how a lot of ideologues would be just reading crap into these issues that weren't there to begin with. Anyway. Pi 373, I'm not entirely sure about that. Extinction level events have taken out major portions of a life a few times. Well, about 5 main ones, and smaller ones more frequently. Seems we don't have enough time to bring on the variety we see again becoming extinct. Any mass extinction cleans out anywhere from 75 to, whoops, keep on clicking the little thing. Mass extinction will clear out a big proportion, 70, 80, 90%. The Permian was probably the worst. It depends on how you measure it. one of my posts I had on the mass extinction issue, tip 1.2 at my website. See, I've written crap on here, so you can actually go around and check out some of this stuff. Points out how, I think I was in relation to the Ordovician mass extinction, that how severe it was depends on how you measure it. If you're looking at the species level versus the genera versus the family level. And it's relatively difficult for a lot of things to be cleared away the higher in the taxonomical record you go. So phyla tend not to be gone away. In some groups are much more resilient. Insects are really hard to bump. I think the Permian mass extinction is the only time that the insects kind of went, but even there had a relatively minor effect on them. And other things, bacteria and others are perfectly happy to get along with their thing, and they will maneuver around it. Relatively few phyla disappear. You've got trilobites going extinct. I don't think ammonites are classified at the phylum level. And so as you move farther down the thing, you're more likely to find extinction occurring as you go lower and lower in the taxonomical level. And remember something else, that 90% or so plus of all the extinctions that's happened on the planet did not occur during mass extinction events. That admittedly there's severe bottlenecks that transform the trajectory of what happens later on as the bathtub refills with new evolutionary novelty. The dinos died simply because the O2 levels dropping. Yeah, no. I'm not sure that there was an earlier, the Permian mass extinction had a really big drop in O2 levels during the Triassic period to where you would have been gasping for breath at a much lower altitude than before. I think the oxygen levels dropped down to about 12% or so at that point, 12 or 15, something in that range, as opposed to their highball period when they were up in the 30, 40, 50% level, up in the Carboniferous, if memory serves me. And there were some high oxygen levels or higher levels in the 25% range, I think, at times during the Cretaceous, that animals presumably would have been adapted to and had a little bit of tough going on it. But the major factors had to do with a lot of other stuff going on. Ocean acidification that was interfering with ocean systems from the big Deccan traps of volcanic eruptions down in the Indian Ocean. And then, of course, the asteroid impact that just added one more bad thing to the mix. We're still not entirely clear why ecosystems fall down, go boom like that during mass extinctions. What exactly are their keystone species? Are there threshold levels of interactions that when you reach a certain level, the system isn't stable enough to be able to recover from them easily? And we don't know enough about that to deal with it. In terms of what we are doing now artificially in getting rid of species, largely by simply taking over their habitat and chopping down the forest and anything that's living in the forest and paving stuff over and therefore changing the amount of stuff. Heat sinks that we are producing in cities because we don't have enough trees. We're starting to correct that in creating more green spaces and better drainage systems so that the waters can go into the system. When everything is paved over, the water has nowhere to go except the storm drains, and there it can clog up, and so you get worse flooding in a lot of urban areas than you would have if you had a different drainage system. All of this stuff connects up in some very intricate ways. And I know just from my own personal experience, when I lived in California back in the day, in the 1960s, we would visit Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm fairly frequently, once a year, probably. And I knew by personal experience how hot Disneyland was in the day compared to Knott's Berry Farm, same time of year, and how cold Disneyland was by comparison to Knott's Berry Farm at night. And what was the difference? Is that Disneyland had a gigantic swath of parking lot without a tree in it. This was just this huge heat sink out in front of the amusement park. And then it was effectively walled off by freeways and urban area on all other sides. Whereas Knott's Berry Farm had all gravel parking with a lot of trees all over the place. So you were basically parking under shade. And that had an effect. It kept Knott's Berry Farm more comfortably cool during the day and warmer at night. So usually when we went to Disneyland and we were going to stay all day, we would take a sweater or something with us so that when we were later in the day, we would have something to put on because the temperatures had dropped so abruptly in Disneyland. Now, what the circumstances is with Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm today, it would be funky to know the difference because I haven't been down there in a long time. And in fact, that giant parking lot doesn't exist anymore at Disneyland. There's a whole bunch of amusement park built out into that. And they built an entirely new set of parking garages over by the hotel to accommodate all of that. So the whole eco structure of Disneyland will be different. And Knott's Berry Farm has turned into a very massive amusement park in all the years since, and I'm not sure how their parking lot structure is and all of that. I haven't looked into that. So there's a little side issue about the ecological implications of urban construction, and that we are finding ourselves getting into that little bit today. I've been sweltering under higher heat out here in the West, and hey, New York City, I hope you enjoy some of our smoke haze. Have you seen the pictures of the Statue of Liberty with the haze of fire smoke from the Western United States that has filtered thousands of miles all across the nation and started hazing up their neck of the woods? It varies here. A couple of the days it was sufficiently thick here in Spokane that you could definitely smell that it was a fire smoke. And other times it would just be light haze, and you would see that the sun actually has been kind of comfortable underneath the haze because the sun hasn't been able to boil down on it. And the last couple of days now, it's started to shift again as the haze is kind of cleared. So that's all has to do with the reflectivity of particles in the atmosphere and all this other stuff. So welcome to on-the-fly climatology of the 21st century. We're in it. And what we can see from the politicians that there is a huge divide on this matter between Republicans and Democrats as to who has their head up their ass and who is a scientific literate. And spoiler alert, Republicans are staking out the head up their ass area in terms of just being completely clueless on this. And so we're having to go through a variety of things where you got to look at who's running for political office and what material is going on, what's evidence that they're offering or not. And that same kind of mind, you think Rand Paul makes clever, accurate decisions on climate issues in the same way that he does on COVID and vaccination? Yeah, no, doesn't work that way. So, Lisa says, if you think, yeah, that's a funky. Well, first of all, you are assuming that at any point Matt Powell thinks. There is no empirical evidence that whatever little BB is rolling around inside of his noggin, that thinking is one of the things. No, he has an ideological position. He riffs off of, he's somebody that makes Kent Hovind seem scholarly. It's Matt Powell is that superficial. His videos are mercifully short. They typically run only a couple minutes. And he sits and just spews some dogmatism, and there it goes. I mean, you have to hand it at least. Kent Hovind goes to the PowerPoint level with a bunch of crap that he's copied from other creationists and never fact checked, but he's trying to be sort of technically. Anyway, the idea is, aren't animals on board the ark going to be making like sticking stuff, methane emissions, cows and various other ruminants and things, aren't you, as well as all the poo and all that. Now, both John Woodmarapp in the famous or notorious Noah's Ark feasibility study, which is, I'm going to be discussing a lot of the content of that in volume 2. The rocks were there in relation to the fiddly bits, but that they and also the Ark Encounter go to great lengths to try to figure out what they're doing with all the number 2s and number 1s coming out of animals and other emissions in there. And they can juggle numbers in such a way that it looks okay. They can make hypotheses about ventilation shafts and ways of channeling rainwater to flush stuff down to somewhere where somehow they're being pushed outside or not. Let's not think too much closely about that. Needless to say, it would be amusing if some extremely well-heeled creationist wants to build an actual working model of the ark, one that actually has to float, and send it out in a hurricane or two and load it up with animals, for 40 days at sea without any provisions other than what they carry on board, with 1,500 kinds of animals of their selection. They can use various things to, since they don't have therapsids or dinosaurs, I'm sure they could find mass and dietary counterpart animals. They'll have to figure out what to do with all the ones that are predatory, and make sure that they made it all out of gopher wood. Anyone know what gopher wood is? Kind of a cypress pine thing, maybe, kind of. Nobody knows because it's only used one time in the text. At any rate, yes. So we got yes, Van Daly, if you want to see how the parties became their lovely selves, check out RJ telling a story on political parties over on my show. Yes, it reminds people that technically I have a history degree. That's my thing. And it related largely to the United States and in that period. So that's an area that I have a great deal of interest in. But I apply that same methodology to everyone else. Yes, the more little information on our little Matt Powell fascist recruitment organization with a very thin veer of religiosity. He should never be platformed on his beliefs, but on his political aspirations to reveal them. Yes. Well, it's one all of us should be keeping an eye out for the various figures that go on, because stupid doesn't always go away. And so Matt Powell is a young person, so it's perfectly possible that he's going to try to have a long-term career in stupid land down into the next decades. Is old. We have a side conversation going on between Pi 373 and Old Scratch on basic cosmology figures in here. All ratios expressed in the non-persistent ones deteriorated. The idea that there could be more than one a selection pressure in ways of varying physical constants. The problem is we don't know if there's any way to actually vary them. We don't know that gravity can ever be in any universe at all different than what it is, for example. Or is it like a stereo set where you can adjust the knobs up and down, and that universes come and go with varying combinations of them? And ours just happened to be one with that combination. There is some argument when you play around, physicists will play around with this kind of stuff as a mental exercise. Some universes, I think Lawrence Krauss has discussed some of this, are ones that basically fizzle out instantly. I mean, they don't do anything. So they can't last long enough to do something. You have to have only universes where you have the numbers match up in such a way that they can last a while and then make like stars, and make stars that make heavier elements and have heavy elements that form stuff and produce like solar systems with planets and all that stuff. All of those gets into that anthropic argument as to how much fine tuning or how much specificity you would have to have in these physical forces. We don't have other universes to look at. So we can't tell whether or not there can be other kinds of physics, whether you can have a universe in which saints fall faster than, slower than sinners and all that kind of stuff. We don't know. So it all becomes deliciously speculative. You can make science fictions based on it. What happens if something from one universe tries to bump into something from another universe? People can perform same things if you have different dimensionality. What would, the old three-dimensional figure coming into the world of flatland, for example, which is an interesting intellectual exercise. But can there be a flatland? Can you have organisms and living organisms and things with minds and little parties and houses in a two-dimensional space at all? Is such a thing as even possible? I have my doubts. I don't think it is there. Van Daly says, there's a universe where I actually finished college. Yeah. I think you have a better chance of that than one in which Ann Coulter is in a universe where she isn't an idiot. That I think you've got better odds on that. So you've got a bunch of little side issues. The anthropic thing pops up inevitably when you're discussing origins issues. And so move over from the young Earth creationist camp to the old Earth Callum style, William Lane Craig kind of universe. And boy, they just love this one. And it's one of the reasons why I think Hank Hanegraaff, the Bible Answer Man guy, is an old universe but young Earth creationist. Never mind how stupid that is. But nevertheless, wants both to be true, because if you accept the standard cosmological framework and the standard physics framework, you get to have all those cute little anthropic fine-tuning issues, which really you can't do easily in a young Earth creationist context, because you've got to tinker with the physics too much. Jason Lyle and all that crowd, where they're trying to alter the speed of light and all that stuff, and it just throws all the physics out the window when you try to pay attention to that, and it becomes an ad hoc tidying up exercise without much substance to it. But so the weight of anthropic arguments is pretty much a preserve that you see coming from old Earth creationists and intelligent design advocates. They've got the turf where they can fiddle with it. Oh, is Second Land a top down or side scroller? Yes. How does that work? I don't know. Don't be frustrated that it's difficult to imagine multi-dimensions, because our brain doesn't do that easily. We exist in a three-dimensional frame that's easy to think about, but like, how can you imagine a fourth physical dimension that is perpendicular to all the other three? Mathematically, you could describe it easy peasy. And in fact, one of my favorite things is the tesseract, which pops up often in science fiction stories. But it is the shadow in three-dimensional space of a four-dimensional hypercube. And it looks like a square cube nested inside of another square cube, where there are lines connecting the corners of each one into the other. So it's like a thing inside the thing, and you can see it rotating, and there's various things online where they fiddle around. So another thing to Google. At any rate, it pops up in the old, good gravy, science fiction story about the witches and all. I'm trying to think. It was made into a movie recently with Oprah Winfrey. Oh, what the hell is that called? Won a Child's Award. I read it when it first came out. God, I can't think of the silly thing off the bat. What the title of it is? I'm having a brain fart. And if somebody thinks about it, let me know. But we really have difficulty imagining that, let alone multiple dimensions. Some branches of physics think about 10 or 11 dimensions in the framing of things, and dimensions that get curled up. You know, what does that mean? Mathematically, it has a sense. And so you now are into things about topology. There's a whole mathematics of stuff that's just weird. And that's why if you ever, one of the things that really indicated to me why the universe is an amazing place is how much strange shit goes on in mathematics. That there are transfinite numbers and imaginary numbers and all this other stuff where your brain is just going, but yet it makes sense mathematically. By the way, does Pi 373 have an actual position? Has anyone been able to detect what he actually thinks? I'm not, or he or she, whoever Pi is. I'm not entirely sure. No, it isn't The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. No, that's the Narnia story. Gosh, I can think. Yipes. I wish I could think of this title of that thing. And it's not Ursula Le Guin. She's a different science fiction writer. Oh, yipes. It'll come to me at some point. It's been made into a show several times. There was a not very good TV movie done of it a few years back. And in fact, I haven't seen the new film remake either. It's not an easy thing to film well. Fantasy is a tough bit, and it's a dark story because you've got, mind control of the parents and evil, and there's a dark evil that's taking over the universe, and these three little witches are coming in, and this kid helps, and they go off and they're trying to save their parents and all of that. God, I wish I could think of the title on all that. At any rate, it's a really tough story to do, in the same way that Ray Bradbury is often very, very difficult to film. But I have a little soft spot for the bloody thing that I can't remember the damn title of, or even the author of it. It'll come to me at some point. Anyway, Oprah Winfrey was in it, and I've seen some shots from it, and it looks like it's only adequately filmed. I'd have to see the whole movie to find out whether or not it hangs together well. I don't think it did terribly well at the box office. This was maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, something like that. Anyway, the tesseract was an element in that it was this dimensional stuff, and the science fiction writer that wrote it, she's very religious, had integrated these elements of physics along with all the fantasy magical aspect and the good and evil theology issues. And so it was a very thought-provoking and effective work, and it's had a soft spot in there, even though I'm not a believer. It was still an intriguing, thought-provoking work, and in many respects raises more issues along the way than the Narnia tales. They're written in a relatively similar style, a very straightforward. It was intended for children. It was a children's book, not an adult work. The Wrinkle in Time. Thank you. Oh, bravo! Somebody came up with it. There we go. Aha! A Wrinkle in Time. Damn it! Thank you. Good. Somebody had in there. And again, there's not many versions. There have been 2 versions of it: a TV one and the other one. Now, Rocks Were There, the movie. Yes, I'm not entirely sure about that one. Well, it might become a documentary. That could be a theoretical thing. And it would be a long multi-series because there's a hell of a lot of stuff in The Rocks Were There. Now, The Paralogues of Phileas Fogg. Now, there is a fiction work, which you can also get and while away your time. I'm just now slogging along through the final sections of the second book in the Paralogue series. That's Phileas Fogg and Aouda and Passepartout and friends are in the 1870s and running amok and doing their various things. And spoiler alert, the thing in the box in Chicago gets reused a lot in the second book. So you'll have to read book 1. Take a side trip to 1873 or 1872 and find out what really happened around the world in 80 days. That's my shameless plug on there. Oh, Peter, hello. Finally awake to catch you live again. Yes. It's upside down on a lot of different things. I was involved earlier in the day with a project that's ramping up for Free Thought City, which is trying to work out a whole free thinker website thing, virtual city that they're going to be trying to create. And I'm one of the people involved in curating aspects of it, like the film collection and stuff that would be shown on that. And we just had a little chit chat on all that stuff. Lisa's, I'm still on Evolution Slam Dunk. Slam Dunk is the little teeny book, and then Evolution, The Rocks Were There is the even bigger one. And Rocks Were There Volume 2 is probably going to be about the same size as Rocks Were There Volume 1. How does the old Earth, young Earth? Oh, yes. You're wondering an interesting thing about how do you be an old universe, young Earth person? Hank Hanegraaff is not very good at explaining it either. There we go. It was basically that he just wants it to be true. So he would imagine that the universe has been around for like 14 billion years, and somehow the solar system comes in only 6,000 years ago. Sorry, there's way too much that doesn't connect up on that. But anyway, Sarah said the book is where I learned the mitochondria, its own DNA and RNA. It wasn't all human. Yeah, mitochondria is all. Yes, mitochondria it was one of the big things as the biologists began to study them. They realized that there was curious features about them. And to this day, in fact, there are curious features about them. But the main factor is that inside of every single one of our cells are oodles of little mitochondria, not just a single one. And they are almost exclusively inherited from the maternal line. There are occasional examples in nature of paternal DNA being brought in, the mitochondrial DNA, but it's very, very rare, but it does occur. For all practical purposes, it's from the female lineage on there, the mitochondrial DNA. But the point is, it has its own proprietary DNA that's separate from the nuclear DNA that makes up our normal DNA that makes you look the way you do. So how did that happen? And that whole brings up the idea of ye old endosymbiosis, which is a wonderful word that if you don't know about it, you definitely should. Endosymbiosis, that was not invented by Lynn Margulis, but certainly popularized by her, who had her odd streaks and she kind of overdid it in arguing that practically everything of importance, like the origin of species, and that was endosymbiotic phenomenon. No, that was overblowing it. But it is agreed that mitochondria are an example of a bad case of indigestion, to where a microorganism is being devoured by another microorganism unsuccessfully, and it stays, and it ends up as an organelle, a subcomponent of that. Same thing has happened later with the development of chloroplasts in plants, where they already have mitochondria. So the endosymbiotic event for mitochondria in eukaryotes had taken place long before. And a secondary one occurs as cyanobacteria get glommed onto that become the chloroplasts in plant cells. Now, the funky thing is, to this day, they're not entirely clear about which bacterial group mitochondria came from. And I suspect that it's because the group that they came from is extinct. That there's more than the couple groups that we can see today, billions of years later, and that there may in fact have been a shakeout, and that whatever was the group that the mitochondria was, and that are similar to one group of bacteria and they're similar to another group of bacteria, that they made a third group. That's my suspicion. Yeah, it's not a provable thing at the moment, but nonetheless, that wouldn't surprise me. And it's my conception of what's going on in the boring billions of years before the Cambrian explosion, when we get multicellular life going berserk and making big things that you can see without a microscope. My suspicion is that there was an awful lot of shakeouts that would be fairly described as mass extinction events that we can't see as such in the geologic record, because they're involving bacteria schmoozing around in the sea and down in rocks and hydrothermal vents and other stuff. That there could have been big shakeouts and mass extinction competition events going on over those enormous amounts of times as continents shift and all that, that are functionally invisible. And all we can see in the remnants is the fact that we're looking at a restricted gang of survivors. That's one of the idea there. Alvendes, do we know if eukaryotes got mitochondria or nucleus first? That's interesting. I suspect that it's nucleus first. That's core. And the whole issue about how the eukaryotic nucleus, to what extent is that something that is independently an endosymbiotic event? And the mitochondria come in the scene to make a powerhouse bit energy dependence going on. And when you get organelles like that, then they kind of go through a shakedown as they lose DNA and eliminate stuff they don't need. Why do you need the factory to make X when I can get it from the host, and vice versa? And so the things alter. And then there's secondary endosymbiotic events, which they can actually see some of those that are occurring in the living world. But yeah, my somebody who's more expert on it than I am can weigh in on it. But my familiarity of it, I think the nucleus would be coming first. And if somebody knows to the contrary and has some technical work on that I'm not aware of, well, throw it at me. I'll want to know to make it clear. And we're talking about, see, the eukaryotes are emerging quite early in the scheme. I mean, it's billions of years ago, but it's still way before the Cambrian explosion stuff. And there's a lot going on there. With the mitochondria are coming on the scene, and you've got my suspicion is that a lot is going on in terms of genetic developments and competition and long windups as new gene systems are coming into play, that then show up as the components that eventually go in the lineages that we can still see operating. And so just as trilobites have gone extinct, they lasted a long time. Why would we naturally assume that some bacterial lineages couldn't have gone extinct too over time? So there we go. We're just past the hour on here. Any further questions on our hot, muggy, geeky 200th episode? 200, I tell you. We've been at it that long. And I'm just looking just as icky now as I was at episode 1. Any final questions before I shut the stream down and tell everybody? Oh, before I do that, I suppose I should put up shameless plug for the book. And Let's get that little thing going. We've got our little adverts here. There we go. And yeah, let's get that going. Let's put our advertisement up for Jackson and my book, The Rocks Were There, Volume 1. It will contain everything you need to counter pseudoscience. And then you'll get even more of what you need in Volume 2. We're very, very proud of the work. It's diligently documented. It's extensive. It has a substantial amount of detailed references and indexing so you can find stuff in it. And I know for a fact there's been quite a few people that have been using it actively. They go, there's a topic. How? Well, RJ and Jackson have covered that in The Rocks Were There. It's right there on page such and so, and they've got the current material on there, and so that improves their own apologetics, that they can respond to arguments because they can find this information all in one bloody place, and it's largely relating to the Answers in Genesis core, but there's a heck of a lot on the intelligent design movement and old Earth creationism and other matters as well, because they bump into all that. Any upcoming debates? No, I don't have a damn debate going on. It's at all. It's possible that some people might never want to debate with me ever again. I don't think Kent Hovind has been stampeding to my door for that. But at any rate, The Rocks Were There. We're very, very proud of it. I don't think you will find it a disappointment in terms of its content. And we will be doing the same thing to fill out the remainder of the work, where we're dealing with human evolution, the origin of tetrapods, the rest of the flood story, because we didn't really go into the origin of the flood legends and all the dynamics of paleoclimates and paleogeography and that, which are just blown to smithereens in the wacky creationism world that we just alluded to a bit in the first work that had originally been planned as just part of a single work, but it got way too big for all that. So with that, everybody's got their questions and things on in there. Everybody stay safe. If you haven't been vaccinated, get vaccinated. We've got the Delta variant running around here. We got some scientific illiterates that are being suicidally stupid. Some of them in the neighborhood over in Idaho, just across the border. I mean, Washington State has sound policies, but we can't keep Idahoans from leaking over from wacky land, so everything gets to be a mess. Peter asked me, would I ever want to talk to Hovind again? I would be perfectly happy to have a discussion with Hovind about his source usage and source methods, because that's the same issue that I do with anybody now, is that I want to know, where are you getting your stuff from? Do you fact check stuff? Why did you say this? Why do you rely on what you do? And that's not a topic that they like to discuss. You get in the discussion that I had most recently on abiogenesis with, I think, Sal, he didn't want to discuss that particular, or either Sal or Otangelo, I can't remember who it was right off the bat. Anyway, he didn't want to discuss the abiogenesis issue as to why it was such an obsession of creationists, which is a methodological issue. He instead just wanted tunnel vision in on stuff. Nephilim Free, for example, he refuses to have any debates with me unless it's on kind of a generic why evolution is wrong. He won't discuss source methods issues. And so I doubt seriously whether Kent Hovind would ever want to do that kind of a thing there, because he doesn't deal with criticism terribly well. I'm the altar boy of atheism, according to him, and I had called him a bottom feeder because he is. And he's, of course, embroiled in a whole bunch of stuff over the ex-wife and all of the issues of him behaving like Kent Hovind. So it's a pathetic wretch of a thing. Okay. Yes, the cosmology supports the old universe. Anyway, I'll be shutting down tonight, and we'll see you all next week on episode number 201. If you have some spare scratch, a $1 or $2 to throw in as a patron on a regular basis, click the patron thing, which I'll be putting up in every video, or you can go to one of the previous ones and do it there. And then, of course, there's links to the books there. The only one that I don't technically put up there is Paralogs of Fog, because that's a fiction work, but you can find that at Amazon along that as well. So if you like some fiction reading to while away your summertime, grab a hold of that as well. And yes, and wear the masks. Be safe. This is a civic-minded thing to do. We want to return to normal, and we can't return to normal if too many people are stupid. And it makes it tough for the rest of us that aren't stupid. And plus, people die. The sad thing that has happened, there are ones that where there are people who bought into these stupid lies about COVID, that it was just a hoax and then vaccines don't matter and all that, that they're in the hospital and they want to, oh, I didn't know it was this serious. I didn't know it was real. Well, can I be vaccinated now? And the nurses have to tell them, sorry, that's too late. If you've already got COVID, vaccination ain't going to help you. You needed to do that earlier. And so here that we're seeing a reprise. You can argue that some of this behavior back in 1918 to 19 with the Spanish flu, the old influenza epidemic, was understandable because of the general lack of knowledge that people would have had available in the pre-internet era. But we're in the 21st century here. Nobody has an excuse for that. Hear that, Senator Rand Paul? You have no excuse for the opinions that you offer. Anyway, we will see you all next week, and everybody stay safe, and don't accept any wooden penguins. Learn and study, and because the universe is way too interesting to not be studied. It's far too fun. Okay, bye.